Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Akhanda Mandalakaram Vyaptam Yena Characharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Ajnanaatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Gurur Brahma Gurur Vishnu Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha Gurudeva Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sthavaram Jangamam Vyaptam Yat Kinchit Sacharacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chidmayam Vyapti Yat Sarvam Trailokyam Sacharacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Om Pathaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavatam Narayana Swayam Vyasena Kratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashaധ്യായിനിം Amba Tvamanusandatami Bhagavad Gita Bhavatveshinim Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudra Marutaha Stunvanti Divyai Savai Vedai Sangapadakramopanisadai Gayanti Yam Samada Dhyanavastita Tatgatena Manasa Pashyanti Yam Yogino Yasyantam Navidu Surasuragama Devaya Tasmai Namaha Devaya Tasmai Namaha. So we chant the last three verses.
29, 30 and 31. Samoham sarvabhuteshu name dveshyosti na priyaha ye bhajanti tumam bhaktya mahiteshu chatyaham api chestu duracharah bhajate mam ananyabhav sadhureva samantavyah samyak vyavasito hi saha क्षिप्रं भवति धर्मात्मा शश्वच्छान्तिं निगच्छति कौन्तेय प्रतिजानीहि न मे भक्तः प्रणश्यति.
So the last one we just chanted last time. So it says, soon he becomes righteous and attains eternal peace. O Kaunteya, know for certain that my devotee is never destroyed. So this follows on from the previous verse, which was talking about the most sinful. Even if the most sinful worship me with devotion to none else or with single-pointedness, again he mentions this ananya bhakti. He too should indeed be regarded as righteous, for he has rightly resolved. So in this chapter, Lord Krishna is again telling us the different shades of people, I mean different personality constructions. And he says that even those who are the Mudhas and the Mahatmas, that was the first kind of category he described to us, that the Mudhas are those who are lost in the me and the mine. In other words, their identification with themselves and the attachment with the things of the world is so strong that for them, even to think that there is a reality beyond their individuality, that becomes difficult. So they're not even aware that anything exists beyond themselves, that there is a reality which is, this hidden reality which Lord Krishna is talking about in this chapter, the royal secret, the royal knowledge. It is not there for them. They don't even believe in God. They don't believe in anything. So those are the Mudas. On the other hand, the Mahatmas, who are really very much aligned to the divine, the divine idea, and their life, and their thought, and their action, everything is aligned to that kind of thinking and being. So here also he is pointing out that those people who are lost, if they start now making this firm resolve that they are going to start doing the sadhana as prescribed in this text, he says, with devotion to none else, then with this single pointedness, he should also be regarded as righteous. So, that label immediately changes, that, from a Muda to become this kind of sadhu. It means that one has focused the attention now from the me and the mine to the and thou. And when that focus changes, he is saying that these people now should be regarded as righteous and they have rightly resolved. So rightly resolved also means that they have now discovered the true purpose of life. This is something which is which is obvious on the one hand, but it is not actually thought about or realized by most of the people. Right? What is really the purpose of life? And they kind of define their own purpose of life in many different ways. Some people think that it is only about acquiring and hoarding, whether it's wealth or money or relationships. They keep on doing this and say that this purpose of my life is either to acquire and hoard, or to um, actualize the potential within myself. So I got this skill and talent and this ability, and therefore the way in which I see the purpose of life is that I have to actualize all this potential within myself. And then the people who actually understand that there is a reality beyond what we perceive, those turn their attention to this higher reality. So everybody has got different purpose, and sometimes the purpose is not clear, sometimes it's clear, but still, the nature drags them away from that true purpose. And we see that, Lord Krishna is describing all these different kinds of people and says that wherever you are, whoever you are, this knowledge is absolutely accessible to you, and once you turn your attention towards this knowledge, you will see that you begin to uh, move towards this divine knowledge. You become righteous, and you have rightly resolved. So this all follows from the one earlier verse, which is really the key verse in one of the key verses in this chapter, is number 27, right? So when Lord Krishna talks about whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, in sacrifice, whatever you give in charity, whatever you practice as austerity, do it as an offering to me. Now, this is one very powerful way which is describing how one can begin to turn one's attention moment to moment towards the divine. So whether it is through the thought, whether it is through the action which we carry out, whether it is through our feeling, all the activities of the body, mind, intellect are turned towards the divine. Turned towards the divine by saying what? By saying that I am offering this action, this thought, this word, this deed to the Lord. And this complete turning towards God through the thought, word, and deed is really a very important key point which is being made by Lord Krishna here. And he says, this is the way in which this single pointedness is going to come. Because later on he describes to us really what is the effect of turning our life towards the divine in this complete way, not a partial way. Okay? Because normally what we do is we do it in a partial way, part-time devotees, right? So that sometimes we say, okay, now this 1 hour I'm going to spend, listening to this knowledge, reflecting on the knowledge, becoming single-pointed with this knowledge. But then as soon as we get caught up in the things of the world, then everything goes out, right? So which means that our efforts are not really concentrated, our attention is not single-pointed, that we are not completely turning towards the divine, and therefore it is not going to have the effect which it would have if we were to turn this attention towards the divine completely rather than partially. So this complete turning towards the divine is a very important prescription given by Lord Krishna. Okay? And we need to also ask ourselves this question: how is my turning towards the divine? Is it partial? Is it complete? If it is partial, why is it partial? What is it which is making me not to actually turn completely towards the divine? Is it that I have some doubt? Is it I'm uncertain about this? Is it that I'm not clear about what is required? And so on and so on. Okay. Because he says that once you do this, actually what happens is that you become free from the bonds of action, yielding good and evil fruits. He says, with the mind steadfast in the yoga of renunciation and liberated, thou shalt come to me. So this is the reward of turning completely towards the divine. He says, you will come to me. In other words, the realization of the self will take place. There is a complete kind of liberation from the cycle of birth and death. He says we also go beyond the bonds of action. In other words, we go beyond the law of karma. That karma no longer actually affects us, so that whatever is being done by the body, mind, intellect is no longer generating any further karma, and therefore there is no question of coming back again to the cycle of birth and death. So the reward is enormous, and this indeed is really the fulfillment of the purpose of life. The purpose of life is moksha. The purpose of life is liberation. And in order to attain that highest goal, we need to have a complete turning towards the divine. Okay? So if we are convinced that really the highest goal is nothing but the attainment of liberation, if that conviction is strong enough, then what will happen is that we'll get committed to this path, and with that commitment comes the complete turning towards the divine. So I think it's important to understand this point, because sometimes we may be on the path, but this complete turning is not yet achieved, but it is something which can be achieved, and it is possible to have this complete turning towards the divine through this single pointedness, this ananya bhakti. So, and then he goes on to say that the same am I to all beings, To me, there is none hateful or dear, but those who worship me with devotion are in me, and I'm also in them. So you remember I was talking about this last time, that in the earlier verses he was saying, I'm not in them, they are not in me, I'm in them, they are in me. Different ways of looking at this relationship between oneself and the divine. So this relationship is defined by two reference points. One is a relative reference point, whereby we are in this relative reality. Another one is the absolute point of view, whereby then everything becomes what you call, without a second, Advaita. This Advaita is the ultimate experience of this relationship between the individual self and the absolute self. And here he is saying, with this devotion comes the oneness of me and you. So with this devotion, in other words, with this Ananya Bhakti, single-pointedness of purpose, complete turning towards the divine, it is possible to get, it is then possible to get merged with that divinity completely. So that's why he's saying that I am in them and they are in me. So then he makes the point that even if you are at the very extreme of this identification with the me and the mind, it is still possible for you to start making this journey, as long as, and here is really the qualifying factor, which is what? The qualification is, as long as this devotion is to none else. In other words, this is a single-pointed devotion to the divine. He should indeed be regarded as righteous, and he will be rightly resolved. Which brings us to the verse number 31, whereby he says, soon he becomes righteous and attains eternal peace. Know for certain that my devotee is never destroyed. So he is to be regarded as righteous as soon as he steps on the path, even if he is at the other extreme, whereby he is completely involved and identified with the individuality. The me and the mind is very strong, and even when the me and the mind is very strong, when he makes that firm resolve to be single, to have the single point of devotion, then he says, what will happen is this, with this single point of devotion, he becomes righteous. And the word which is being used is dharmatma. He becomes a dharmatma from what one can say is the Buddha. From the Buddha to the dharmatma is a complete transformation. Complete transformation. Think of people who are this kind of Buddhas in your life, who are not bothered about any of these things at all. And they are so completely engrossed in the me and the mind. For them, this is a waste of time, right? For that kind of person to become a dharmatma, right, is a complete transformation, inner transformation, which has taken place through what? Through this complete turning towards the divine.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you are around such people,
yeah,
who reckon everything like this, I know everything, this is a
yeah,
waste of time, whatever.
Yeah.
Where do you draw the line between your dharma? Because I'm from what we said a few weeks ago was we just focus on ourselves.
That's right.
Forget about the rest.
Mm-hmm.
So are you doing your dharma or are you not doing your dharma? Do you actually leave them on their journey, not get involved? It's safer to do that, but I don't know what's the border, what's the gateway for us.
Yeah. So I think one important question to ask is, what is my relationship to this person, right? Because then we are looking at it from the context of dharma. So what is my dharma in relationship to this person? If you say this person is, for example, my spouse, right? And I say to myself, as far as I am concerned, within the context of dharma, between me and my spouse, I have got every right to point out this pathway, because this relationship is the one which is a sacred relationship. And when I made the vow of getting married to this person, one of the things which was indicated was that we walk together on this path so that we may attain liberation. So, that clearly defines what is my dharma and what is the dharma of the other person in terms of walking towards the ultimate goal of life. Now that it becomes clear. But if it's somebody who is distant from me, then perhaps that dharma does not apply to me in that sense. Okay. If you take it from a different point of view, so as a teacher, I've got every right to tell everybody that this is the pathway you should follow. So my dharma as a teacher is that I will tell everybody, whether it is this person or that person or that, whoever it is. My dharma as a teacher is to tell everybody about this knowledge and say, you must try and tread on this path. So you have to decide really, in my mind, in your mind, where is my responsibility, where is my duty towards this person in terms of this ultimate goal of life, and whether I have got any responsibility towards this person to show them the path. Once that is clear, then you have to find the most appropriate way of guiding that person, whether it is by just hinting now and then, or whether it is by a discussion and a dialogue. That yes, this is what I am, I'm learning myself, this is what I'm practicing, this is the effect which is, this is what the knowledge is all about, etc. So it could be the most appropriate way of discharging your duty as you see fit. And then, that determines really what is going to happen, where is the boundary, where do I start, where do I stop, where do I not actually proceed beyond that. That becomes clear.
And I think also, it's also if you're on that pathway in the journey,
Yeah.
I think there's that impact on that individual,
That's right.
which can inspire them
That's
out of
right.
their
That's right.
life.
Yeah.
So, and ask a question, and I think that's the moment to.
So that can happen anytime, and I think it can happen to any person who is traveling on this path, and all of a sudden that inspiration comes, and the whole pathway changes. And I've seen many times, even in my own personal life, I saw that complete change in terms of even thinking and what I was doing, because of Gurudev's inspiration, because it can have a powerful effect as well. But as far as the individual is concerned, yes, there is something to be done, depending on your relationship to that person, depending on what that responsibility is and what your duty is. And then you find the most appropriate way of discharging that duty. So here he says that he soon becomes righteous. So here Gurudev is saying that Dharmatma is is not fully expressed. The term Dharmatma in the stanza is not fully expressed when it is translated as man of righteousness. So what does it mean, Dharmatma? He says that the Dharma we have already known. So the idea of Dharma in its essential meaning means what? It means the law of being. So the law of being is what? The law of being of any human being is that the dharma of man is the divine Atman within himself or herself. So the dharma of man can be translated in two ways. Number one, what is the essential nature of man? The essential nature of man is the divinity within themselves. That is the real, true nature of a human being. And if we define it in another way, is that how is this inner divine nature going to express itself in the transactional world? Then dharma means that there is a certain way in which you think and behave in the world. So the two meanings are connected. The one meaning which says that my essential nature is that of divinity. Secondly, my outer transaction through this body, mind, intellect will begin to express this inner divine nature in all my transactions, which means that I live a life of dharma. And that dharma means that I work according to and I express myself through the body, mind, intellect in my transactions according to my role and my stage of life. And that will determine what my actions and my choices are going to be. So the outer expression of the inner divine nature is dharma, and the essential nature of myself is also dharma. So he says, and this person soon becomes a dharmatma, whereby the two meanings which I've just talked about, he becomes more and more aware of his or her divine nature. That's number one. Number two, the expression of this connection with the divinity begins to come about in the outer life as well. So the inner recognition and the outer expression, both are included in this idea of dharmatma. Okay. So if you say this person becomes a dharmatma, it means that the inner recognition is more and more available to this person, and the outer expression of this recognition comes about as righteousness in the outside world. So from a person who has been in denial, where he is even denying his own inner true nature, this transformation results in not only the recognition of the inner divinity, but also an outer expression of that inner essence. So this is what we call dharmatma. So it's not just a righteousness. Righteousness is a narrow meaning of this idea of dharmatma, and the wider meaning is not only the recognition of the inner self as the true self, and the outer expression in terms of the transactions of the world. So he says soon, in good time. In good time means that the effect of living such a life will begin to have the effect, and soon this transformation will take place, whereby this what Gurudev says here is the fragrance of divinity begins to express itself through his motive, through his thoughts, through the actions. Now that also begins to happen. So, we can see this kind of transformation beginning to take place, right? And the more you begin to connect with this knowledge, the more it becomes a part and parcel of your daily existence. You will see that people change. That change comes about. And you may have seen this change in yourself as well. That, if I think about myself 10 years ago, 20 years ago, then I am no longer the same person I was when I look at myself now. So this change does come about, and this is what he's talking about, is that even if you're right at the other end of the spectrum, it is possible for you to start traveling on that journey, and you come to become a dharmatma. And this transformation comes about in what you say, Shipram, soon. Soon it comes about. So you now ask, soon is how long? Soon is how long? Okay. So it means that it all depends on two things. Number one is the intensity of your effort, which is really about how much have you turned towards the divine. So intensity of your effort, purusharth. And the other factor is your prarabdha. So prarabdha and the intensity of the effort will determine how long it's going to take you to reach this point of dharmatma. So it's just like if you got, if you got a cooking vessel which has now got layers and layers and layers of food on it will take a longer time for you to clean it because it's now encrusted with all kinds of impurities. Or if you go to, if you want to get the water from a very muddy river, polluted river, if you take that, it will take a long time for you to now clean it up and make it purified. So depending on your prarabdha, in other words, your vasanas and your karma, how much are they actually encrusting your personality? How much vasanas are there which have taken you into the depths of the me and the mind? And how difficult are your karma in this particular prarabdha karma in this life? So suppose now you say my prarabdha karma is so bad that I'm not even in contact with anybody who can give me satsang. Because your prarabdha has pushed you so far, okay? And your vasanas are so strong that one is located in this me and mind completely. So that is your prarabdha karma on your one hand, and the vasana which are there, if they are so strong, then it will mean that the intensity of the effort has to be great in order for one to overcome this effect of the prarabdha karma as well as the vasanas. So we will mention again this idea a bit later on, but really it depends on how far apart these two things are, and if one is located at one end of the spectrum, in order to go to the other end, it means that the intensity will be even more required in order for that transformation to take place.
So can you give an example of increasing the intensity? When you say intensity,
Yes.
for us to use that measure.
That's right. Okay. So you remember that well, not within this text, but within the context of Patanjali, I mentioned earlier that it depends on the kind of, on the one hand, the kind of commitment which you have made, on the other hand, the kind of intensity of effort which you are making. Now, what does it mean, intensity of effort, right? So I may be actually doing this thing throughout the day, but the intensity is not there, in the sense that, how much is it connected to my body, mind, intellect while I am doing this practice? If the awareness is complete in terms of my body, mind, intellect, and I know that this connection is there all the time, moment to moment, then that intensity has deepened. It has intensified. My sadhana is intensified. So not only the depth of that sadhana, but also the time within which that is practiced. So for example, if I say, okay, for the 1 hour in the morning, I'll be completely absorbed in this sadhana, but then the rest of the day is taken up by other things. Okay. Now that is one way of saying, okay, the intensity is there, but it's only there for a short time. Now that intensity has to be exerted in such a way that it is throughout the day. So that means that intensity, depth-wise and time-wise, is there throughout the day. That is the most intense you can get. Okay, and this, in a sense, what Lord Krishna was talking about earlier, is that in order to overcome the chanchalata of the mind, in other words, the fickleness of the mind, which is nothing but an expression of that vasana and that one's response to the vasanas, the only way is abhyas and vairagya. Now, abhyas, as we define, is exactly what he's talking about here, is that every thought, every word, every action is devoted to the divine. It is offered up to the divine, which means that there is no room, there is no kind of, room for us to say, okay, now this thought is not, I'm not going to offer, or this word I'm not going to offer. Every thought, whatever you do, whatever you think, whatever you say, has to be offered up. That is the kind of intensity I'm talking about.
So all actions are worship.
Every action is a worship to God. Every thought is linked to that worship. Every feeling is linked to that worship. This is what I mean by a complete orientation towards the divine, so that nothing is escaping from this connection with the divine. And that is the point. Okay. And not only that, but also that it is a full-time job, in the sense that every moment of my waking time is taken up by this sadhana. With that kind of intensity, it is absolutely, it is absolutely clear that the attainment of the goal will be there. Okay. So, I mean, if I give you the example of Valmiki, right? From a complete, like he's talking about, the very sinful person, but he gets inspired by the rishis who tell him that you're doing all these things, but who is going to take responsibility for all your actions? And he gets so inspired, and he realizes the truth of what he is doing, so that within that short time, he becomes completely transformed into a sage who can write, the beautiful Ramayana. Okay. So that kind of transformation is available if this complete turning takes place. Nisargadatta Maharaj, right? He was suffering so much, so involved in his, day-to-day transactions. The me and the mind was there, and in that process he was suffering. So he goes to the Guru, and Guru says, why are you suffering? You are not this self who is suffering. You are Satchidanand. And when he started just practicing what his Guru had taught him, just the thought, within 3 years, he achieves this realization. How? Because his intensity was so, strong. It was so deep that every moment he would turn his attention towards this thought. I am that. I am that. You read his book called I Am That. You will see the kind of things which he talks about. So even he says, I get a few moments, I will just turn my attention towards that. Every moment I get, I will turn my attention to that. So much so that, it then becomes a constant kind of reminder of his true nature, of his true self, connection with the true self. So that is the kind of intensity I'm talking about. Okay. So with that comes soon enough, he says this, he becomes a Dharmatma, and with this divine awareness, he attains eternal peace. So Gurudev again comments on this idea of eternal peace. Shanti is this inner peace. He says it is not something which is an absence of suffering or an absence of pain or an absence of agitation, but really speaking, it is something which arises out of your recognition of your own true divine nature. That is the kind of peace he's talking about. He says this is experience when the mind is completely at rest. When the mind is at rest, this stillness of the mind, and I keep on saying these are the two things which are really the things to be achieved in one's life. The single-pointed mind and the still mind. The single-pointed mind leads you towards the still mind, and it is in that stillness that what he says is opens the window through which man peeps out to see himself reflected in the mirror of the truth. This Gurudev's poetic language. He says this stillness of the mind opens up a window whereby you see yourself as this divinity. And in that divinity is this complete silence, complete peace. Okay? So this peace arises not out of getting rid of your agitation, but this peace arises because you now recognize your own true divine nature. Once that is done, that peace is, this eternal peace is available, and he says that the devotee then never gets destroyed. So this destruction means what? What does it mean? The devotee doesn't get destroyed. Does it mean that he will have this body which is never going to be destroyed, eternal body? No. It means that having recognized the divinity within himself, then there is no destruction because the divine nature itself can never be destroyed. You remember chapter 2, he says it cannot be cleaved, it cannot be burned, it cannot be destroyed. It is indestructible. And recognition of that indestructible nature says that he is never destroyed. The devotee is never destroyed. On the other hand, if we identify with the body and say, I'm this body, the body gets destroyed. I identified with the mind gets destroyed. Because, this is what happens and this is Arjuna's concern as well, that, I'm going to get destroyed. The kith and kin who are standing in front of me are going to get destroyed. And here it is really Lord Krishna telling him that if you become single-pointed in this way and you have the stillness of the mind, you are not going to get destroyed. Nobody is going to get destroyed.
That's right. If we just backtrack on the point you're making about the responsibility.
Yeah.
And within understanding our relationship with other person.
Yeah.
And based on that we function. And in responsibility, does it imply that that we know everything and therefore it is my duty
No, not at all.
or is it just opening an opportunity for each one of us to grow?
Sure.
And understand each other's prarabdha.
That's right.
That he or she or anybody who's going through a certain and that is although impacting that person, but it's still that the prarabdha, but I can't take the responsibility for that.
You can't take responsibility for the prarabdha, but you can guide in terms of the purusharth. You see what I mean? So you're not taking responsibility for the person because he is in that kind of prarabdha, in that kind of situation. Those are the circumstances which are there for that person. But you can say, even being in this particular prarabdha, what you have to do is that you have to turn your purusharth towards the divine so that you are able to manage yourself whatever your prarabdha. So although you're not responsible for a prarabdha, you're definitely responsible for the purusharth in that case. Because purusharth is what the person is making the effort. So for example, if I say, okay, this person is suffering from this kind of thing and that kind of thing, and that is his or her prarabdha. Now, that person can keep on suffering according to that prarabdha, right? Because it's caught up in that prarabdha. But if I say, look, don't worry about this. This is really the fact of life that everybody suffers from this. Three kind of suffering are there. What you need to do is change the way in which you're thinking, change the way in which you're believing all these things, perceiving all these things, change the way in which you are actually functioning in the world, and turn your attention towards something higher, something nobler. So what I'm saying effectively is that learn how to change your purusharth in such a way that your prarabdha becomes more and more irrelevant. Now that is where I can help. Okay? And this is what Lord Krishna is helping Arjuna as well. Okay? He's telling him that if you turn this your whole mind and your thinking in this way and change the underlying belief system, then what will happen is that whatever your prarabdha, you will be able to meet it in an effective way. See, remember what Gurudev says about Prarabdha and Purusharth. He says Prarabdha is what you meet, and Purusharth is how you meet it. That is what the difference is.
The response to it.
Yes, the response to it. So you can be going through hell, but you've got a choice about how you're going to respond to that. That is your Purusharth. So you can either react to it in the sense that this is what I've always reacted to it in all my life, and this is how I'm going to react to it now. Or you can say, no, I'm going to make a choice about how I'm going to respond to this. Making a conscious choice about how I'm going to meet this particular prarabdha in a different way. Okay? So this is the essence of spirituality. It says that there is another whole response which is available to you. You don't have to suffer. Whatever your prarabdha, you don't have to suffer. Here is a package which I'm giving you. And if you live according to this prescription, then you can deal with any prarabdha which comes in your life. Okay? I mean, Divyapin is an example of that. Is it not?
Yes.
It's just that she had this package available to us. And when she recognized that, this is something which I have turned my life and my attention towards, imagine how much difference does it make. And she's caught up in this product of, severe illness of the body. And here's the Purusharth which is making, which is to say, this is not going to overwhelm me. This is not going to destroy me. This is not going to make me suffer. I will change my attitude towards all these things through my sadhana and see what difference it makes. Right? Not only what she has demonstrated, but also inspire those people around her. That is the difference it makes when you look at Purusharth and how Purusharth can actually change the very fundamental basis of your life and your thinking. So that is where our responsibility lies, is that, and this is what we are doing. If I ask you now, how did you bring up your children? You have got a certain responsibility which says, okay, here is what I have learned about life. Here is my solution to what I have gone through. And this is my guidance to you. This is part and parcel of our parenting, is that, that Purusharth is really where we can give the guidance and say, yes, you are doing Purusharth in terms of your Artha and your Kama, but don't forget the Dharma and the Moksha. So this is what we keep on doing. Don't forget your duty. Don't forget your responsibility. I know that you are so much interested in all these things, but put it within this context of Dharma and Moksha. This is the kind of guidance we can give. This is our responsibility. It's our responsibility to do that as parents. So, it becomes clear that, this kind of Purusharth, which has been given to us in this way, that, how you approach your prarabdha, how you approach the unfolding events of your life, it is definitely possible to change the way in which you respond to it by looking at this completely different way of approaching your prarabdha. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. I think we've got still a few minutes where we can maybe cover some of this things. So in this one, he was saying he becomes righteous. This person who is in that kind of end of this spectrum of identification with the me and the mind. So here in the next one, Lord Krishna is giving examples of what kind of nature we are talking about here. So let's chant this verse.
Mam hi partavyapaashritya ye pisyu papayonayaha Shrityo Vaishyastata Sudraha Tepi yanti param gatim Together. Mahi partavyapaashritya येऽपिष्युपापयोनयः श्रेयो वैश्यास्तथा शूद्राः ते यान्ति परां गतिम्.
Okay, so this might appear a bit controversial because it's talking about women, he's talking about the Vaishyas, and he's talking about the Shudras, and he says these are from sinful birth. But he says for taking refuge in me, they also who may be of sinful birth, women, Vaishyas as well as Shudras, even they attain the supreme goal. Okay. Now, the two things which we have then to understand, is that number one, that what do we mean by this uh, sinful birth, and what is it which is the commonality between what is these three categories which is mentioning, the women, the Vaishyas and the Sudras, and what is the connection between this kind of nature of a person and also the practice which is going to be carried out. Because he's already mentioned to us that, even if you are, completely caught up in the me and the mind, it is still possible to come out of that with this complete orientation of the self towards the divine. So, giving example here, he says that, the sinful birth. So, what do we mean by Papa Yoniya? Papa Yoni. So, Papa Yoni in this case should not be taken as that this is the birth, sinful birth of these three categories of people. What Gurudev gives an interpretation here is that, all along we've been talking about the inner nature and the outer expression. So when the inner nature, which can be thought of as different qualities of this me and mine, and these different qualities or different attributes of this inner nature related to the me and the mind, then we can say that, these three categories of people it is described here, starting with the feminine mind. So it's not about women, but really some attributes which we see are different between the men and the women. Okay, in this case, he's saying that the striya are those that have a larger share of their deep affection and blinding attachment. So, in other words, that what he is saying is that, and of course, some people will say, no, that is not true. I mean, when you think about equality between men and women, that is fine. Equal opportunity is one thing, but there is a difference in terms of the inner nature. So, the difference between the inner nature of the masculine nature and the feminine nature, here what he's saying, the feminine nature is really associated with generally as one with deep affections, which means more turn towards the emotional life and also the attachment to various different things. So one way of thinking about that, what is it about the me and the mind, whereby we get so engrossed in the me and the mind? What are the specific kind of examples of this? So one example of the me and the mind is that we have deep kind of affections. In other words, that we are more and more emotionally inclined, and we have lots of attachments. This is what is known as the feminine mind. So that's number one. Then there is the commercial mind. Commercial mind is a Vaishya, whereby the idea is that I will do something because I want to get something out of it. So this is the kind of person who is always thinking, what am I going to get out of this? And this kind of commercial mind, calculating mind, is ever looking for the profits that can be raised, and is not in the mental attitude which it can easily evolve into the path of meditation. So again, there is a limitation which comes about because of these kind of attributes. So the feminine mind, which is really an emotional mind with lots of attachments, becomes an obstacle towards achieving the end goal. Not an obstacle in the absolute sense, but there is a high amount of resistance because of the deep attachment and the kind of deep emotional connection which is there. On the other hand, where there is the me and the mind, which is always calculating, what am I going to get out of this? What am I going to get out of this? That also is a barrier towards achieving this, what he says, evolve through the path of meditation. So these are the two kind of psychological personalities he's describing here. Then, of course, the last one, which is Sudra, which again refers to a person who is very much living at a physical level. The physical level at which this person is living implies that his full his orientation is really towards the physical aspects of life. So, the emotions are not developed and the intellect is not developed. There is a kind of concentration in terms of just the physical life. So here we see three types of inner personalities. Okay? So the one is this kind of feminine mind, then the calculating mind, and then the physical mind. So all these are different ways of looking at the person who is caught up in this kind of me and mind. Now, the thing is, what do we mean by sin? That's the other thing which we have to talk about. Is sinful here? Sinful birth really means that these people have now become totally identified with the me and the mind. And here Gurudev says, sin according to Vedanta is a wrong tendency in the mind created out of past unhealthy thoughts and negative living. So this negative living and these unhealthy thoughts, which are related to the me and the mind, which means identification and attachment, that is called a sin. Okay. By this definition, it would seem that everybody is living in sin. Because imagine the kind of thoughts which are there on a daily basis, which are related to the me and the mind, okay, which are wrong tendencies of thinking, wrong tendencies of behaving, which are related to the ego and the ego identity, and therefore it means that the sin is always there, right? So it's not extreme to say that different kinds of minds, different kinds of personalities are involved in the identification with the ego at different levels, at the physical level, at the emotional level, at the kind of calculating mind. All these different ways are there, which can be described as sin. Why? Because all of them are taking us towards the identification with the ego and also the attachment with the various things of the world. So if you look at sin in this way, then this verse makes sense, whereby sinful birth is somebody who has come up with that kind of prarabdha, whereby they are now identified so much with the me and the mind through these various different levels of the personality, emphasizing one or the other. And this means that those kind of people are, if they take refuge in this divinity, take refuge in this path, then they will also attain the supreme goal. Now, in simple language, what it means that any kind of personality, any kind of inner nature, whether it is at the physical or emotional or intellectual level, any kind of personality has got access to this path. Nobody is barred. Nobody is barred from this path. Everybody has got access to this path, and everybody is has got access to this inner transformation. That's what it means. Okay, so there is no, we can't say this is a lost case. There is no lost case here. Okay. Everybody is.
Is it also, is it not part of their prarabdha when the inspiration strikes?
Yes. That's right. Yeah. So it could be that, within this prarabdha, because of some kind of past action which has been carried out, that this person will come into their lives, and that provides the moment of awakening for that person. So that is also, that is also there in the prarabdha. Because who are the people who come into our lives? If you think about, who are the people who come into our lives? How is it that we are born in a certain family? How is it that we get married to a certain person? It is all because of the prarabdha, because there is a karmic connection. That karmic connection determines who will come into my life and who will not come into my life. Okay? So that means that even the teacher, even the guru comes in your life because there is some kind of connection. And that connection is the one which then can completely transform this person's life. So that is also, can be part and parcel of the prarabdha.
Ramesh,
Yeah.
Earlier on in the
Yeah.
book, it said that sin is anything that takes you away from your
From
true
your divine
nature,
nature.
from your true nature, yourself. So does that mean that sin is anything that binds you? Anything
So
that is...
yeah, sin actually does what? It takes you into bondage.
Bondage, yeah.
Bondage means what? It means that we are bound within the law of karma. Why?
Yeah.
Because we are acting according to the me and the mind. Right? You remember chapter 3, Lord Krishna says that all actions will bind unless you move away from the me and the mind. In other words, this identification with the action and detachment from the fruit of the action leads towards punya. So what is punya? Punya is the opposite of papa, and punya means that I have now connected with my divinity and my divine nature, so that I move away from the me and the mind through what? Through disidentification with the action, through disidentification with the thought, word and deed, and through detachment from the fruit of the action. Okay.
So everything has to be an offering then.
Yeah, that's why he's saying we give it as an offering.
Everything.
Yeah, give everything as an offering, because this is not mine. I'm offering everything to you, right? So when I offer my thought, when I offer my word, when I offer my deed, and I say, this is yours, right? This offering is a form of worship. And this worship is also the connection to the divine. So it is connecting my thought, word, and deed on a moment-to-moment basis with the divine. In other words, you cannot forget the divine. Even throughout the day, there is no forgetting of the divine. And that's why he said this is the highest purifying knowledge. Why? Because every moment it is purifying one way or the other. Okay? So this is what he says, is that, even if you have different kind of personality makeup, and this is giving example through, these three types. Then he says, even whatever your inner personality constitution, you will be able to arise out of that if you are then willing to take on to this path and become single-pointed, offering everything in thought, word, and deed to me. Okay, and then in the next one, he follows it up by making a corollary statement by saying how much more easily then for the holy brahmanas and the devoted royal saints to attain this goal. In other words, that it may be very difficult when I'm located in the me and the mind so strongly, but if I'm not, then it becomes a very short path. It becomes very easy then to connect with the divine and to start living a life divine. Okay. So this will take up next time, and I think by next week we'll conclude with the last two verses of this chapter. And then we will, I will do a summary of the chapter, and if there is time, then we can start on the next chapter, which is chapter number 10, which follows on from what we've been talking about here, because it talks about the turning. What is this turning towards the divine? Okay. So we'll conclude that for the time being. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kashit Dukha Bhave Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amitam Gamaya Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om